views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of Bronxnet or the program underwriters.
New members of the New York City Council who are active and dedicated to the cause of right to counsel for tenants. I see we've been joined by Borough President Reynoso. Wonderful to see you, Antonio. Cue you in a second, but I do want to introduce our fabulous lineup of colleagues in government: Council Member Sean Abreu, Council Member Carmen de la Rosa, Council Member Shekhar Krishnan, Council Member Lincoln Ressler, Council Member Oswald Feliz, and we may be joined by one or two others. So we have a great lineup of leaders, including tenant advocates as well, that we'll be hearing from, members of the extraordinary Right to Counsel Coalition. Esto se va a hacer más o menos bilingüe porque hay prensa hispana. We're going to do a little bit of bilingual here because we do have Spanish-speaking press. We are sounding the alarm today in the face of what could be an avalanche of evictions to crash over tenants in this city on a scale that we've never seen. It could number in the tens of thousands. There are 200,000 eviction cases pending right now in New York City. Some of them predate the pandemic. Most of them were filed during the pandemic. The vast majority, 90%, are for non-payment. This represents the economic shock that this city has endured over the past 2 years, where so many tenants have lost their livelihood. That is the prime reason for the distress now that they're facing. And we want to first continue to urge action at the state level to now renew and extend the eviction moratorium. Many of us called for that even predating the expiration on Saturday. In a bitter irony, that was Martin Luther King's birthday. Terrible that now tenants are vulnerable in this way. We are calling for additional federal funding for the emergency relief program for tenants. That needs to come from the federal government. Many of us are also, by the way, calling for passage of just cause eviction at the state level. But we are city officials here today to call for action that we as a city, as New York City, can and must take to ensure that every single tenant facing eviction has their fully due right to an attorney, that our city comes through on that pledge we have made, enshrined by law. I'm really proud that we passed that in the previous council. Of course, then Councilmember Vanessa Gibson was my partner in that effort. Then Councilmember Antonio Reynoso was front and center in that fight. We're now serving in new roles. But we want to be really clear about the fact that even prior to this wave, we faced a shortage. We needed more tenant representatives. We needed more supervisors. We needed to lower the caseload. We've been talking about that for a long time. But now the stakes are even higher as the eviction moratorium has been lifted. And we want to make sure there are adequate resources in the system to support every tenant's right to counsel. And we have a demand from the court system that if a tenant does not have their legal representation, that no case moves forward. Now, judges have this discretion. Many of them, to their credit, have been exercising it, but we want an across-the-board policy for all tenants now and in the future that no housing court case will go forward unless the tenant has representation. And if you are a tenant, we want you to know that you have this legal right. And so if you get an advisement that you have a housing court case, don't panic. Don't walk away from your apartment. Don't give in to some unreasonable demand from your landlord, like you accept a buyout or something else. You have a right to an attorney now, and you should talk to your attorney. You can access that by calling 311. You can reach out to any of the elected officials on this call, depending on where you live. And if all else fails, there will be an attorney for you in housing court. Exercise that right. Don't walk away from the apartment. Don't give in to demands From the landlord, you have the right to legal due process represented by an attorney. Brevemente en español. Lo que enfrentan los inquilinos de Nueva York es algo que no se ha visto. No se ha visto en la historia de esta ciudad, que es un posible decenas de miles de desalojos en Nueva York que ya han comenzado desde sábado, cuando ya se expiró el moratorio de desalojos en Nueva York. Esto es una llamada a que ningún caso en ningún tribunal de vivienda pueda avanzar sin que el inquilino tenga su derecho a un abogado. Esa es nuestra demanda y estamos avisando a los inquilinos que si reciban noticia de un caso en los tribunales de vivienda, que llamen de una vez al 311 o a su concejal o presidente del condado a pedir que haya ayuda de parte de su abogado. So we have a demand, we have an advisement to the public, and I'm thrilled to be joined by so many of our colleagues in government now. I first want to turn it over to my brother in government and in the fight for tenants, someone who I'm thrilled to be serving with in this new role, representing our boroughs, the great new borough president of the second best borough in New York City, Antonio Reynoso.
Thank you so much, my brother. Very happy to be here serving alongside you, Borough President Levine, and just want to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that the reason every tenant is going to have representation in housing court is because of the work that you did in passing legislation as a city council member to make that happen. That's something that we have to be paying attention to, and we got to acknowledge. So the fact that the borough presidents are calling on for more support, more resources, and that Borough President Mark Levine is heading this is not by mistake, it is by design. So I just want to thank you for your service as a council member. And to all my colleagues that are here, very happy to see you all. These amazing faces of people that are going to be looking out for the interests of tenants long-term. Shaker Krishnan, who was a lawyer, a housing lawyer that worked in my district, keeping people in their homes in Williamsburg, Bushwick, and Queens, in the Ridgewood portion of Queens and Long Island City. Just want to thank you for that work. And look, let's be perfectly honest. At this point, what we are deciding to do is to foot the city of New York with another crisis, an extended crisis. Homelessness is at an all-time high. And we know the struggles that we've had because of COVID that has not gone away, despite popular belief. And this crisis needs to be met with an equal reaction. And that reaction is protecting the people that are most vulnerable, who can be left without homes and exacerbate or make worse a crisis of homelessness that currently exists in the city. We have to call upon the federal government and the state government to do more. There's only so many resources that are available to us here in the city of New York. And because of it, our hands are tied to some degree as to how we can help people. We can only build housing fast enough. We can only provide so many lawyers. At the end of the day, this is about bringing money and resources to these tenants so they can stay in their apartments longer, and that we can help homeowners that need the help as well. We're not here being anti-landlord or anti-housing owner or house owner. What we want to do is find the resources so we can really protect a vulnerable portion of our population. Brooklyn being the largest borough in the city of New York, and one with that is knee-deep in extreme poverty in many of its neighborhoods, can see, again, an exodus or a homelessness crisis like never before. So we're standing here today just calling on the federal government to step in, the state government to show up and extend this moratorium, which can happen today should our governor ask for it, but extending this moratorium so that we don't see what's all happening already in our courts, which is an inundation of requests for evictions against tenants and residents of the city of New York. I'll be very brief in Spanish. Un placer estar aquí con el presidente del condado de Manhattan, Mark Levine, el segundo mejor condado de todo Nueva York, pero siempre junto en la lucha para asegurar que los inquilinos tengan representación y los recursos necesarios para que se puedan quedar en su hogar. Pero sabemos que si no hacemos nada, si nos quedamos en lo mismo, lo que vamos a ver es más gente sin apartamentos, buscando servicio, de homelessness, y si Dios quiera, con el trabajo que vamos a hacer en este grupo de concejales y representantes del condado, lo que otra vez estamos luchando para asegurar que esos recursos lleguen para nuestras personas. Otra vez, muchas gracias al presidente del condado de Manhattan, Mcqueen, y sé también que estamos con la vicepresidente del Bronx, que está aquí, Peguetto. Un placer y felicidades también en su nuevo puesto, una dominicana. Y perdón que tomé este tiempo para decirle felicidades, por un orgullo siempre ver una hermana progresar. But thank you again, Borough President Mcqueen.
Thank you so much. We're not going to settle the borough competition on this Zoom, unfortunately. It will continue.
All right. You know what? I love Manhattan. I love Manhattan. Love everyone. Yeah. You got a good lineup here of folks. I'm really excited for Manhattan and the Bronx and all of the city of New York.
And we got Queens in the house too. I am thrilled that also joining us from the Bronx, Council Member Althea Stevens. Sorry I'd missed you before, but talk about big shoes to fill. Council Member Stevens carrying on in the district that was represented by one of the my partner in Right to Counsel, of course, Vanessa Gibson. So we appreciate you being here. But I do want to keep it in the Bronx and cue the newly appointed Deputy Borough President, Janet Peguetto. Welcome. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Gracias. Thank you for having me. Again, just standing in support with all of you, and don't want to get into competition, but everyone knows that the Bronx is the #1 borough. The birthing place of hip hop, so we'll lead with that. Again, just an honor to be serving with you all in service. The borough president, as previously stated, it stood behind and led this legislation forward during her time at the city council. And so it's truly, an honor and a privilege to continue to push these efforts forward in this new capacity, and an honor for me to be serving alongside with her, understanding that the Bronx is one of the boroughs with the highest needs, and understanding that the fight does not stop in our legislative efforts, but in our servicing efforts as we continue to bring more resources to our borough, but citywide. Right now, the Bronx has one of the highest numbers in ERAP applications, which just showcase the needs of our borough and the needs for right to counsel and support to prevent evictions and homelessness. And so we support and stand with our tenants. We stand in service with all you and our colleagues in government, and look forward to ensuring that each and every resident is fully resourced and supported. De nuevo, en español, es un placer estar aquí y estar apoyando los servicios y el programa, y quiero que todo el mundo sepa que estamos con nuestros inquilinos durante este tiempo y que nos vamos a asegurar que los recursos necesarios le lleguen a cada inquilino, y que estamos aquí para ayudarlo y asegurar que los servicios y los recursos le lleguen. Y gracias por tenerme. Thank you all for the warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Deputy Borough President. Excited to work with you. We're going to hear throughout our discussion from a few of the activists and leaders who are on the ground. And I'd like to cue someone who I deeply admire, who I consider a very close friend, and who I've been honored to partner with for 8 years running now in this fight. Randy Dillard, representing the Right to Counsel Coalition. If there's a more effective activist group in New York City, I really don't know them. This coalition has been a force for good, and grateful for your partnership and your leadership, Randy. So we'd like to hear from you as well.
Thank you, Mark. But first, let's take a moment of silence for those that have lost their lives in the fire. Okay. I want to thank you, Mark and Vanessa and CASA and the Right to Counsel Coalition, because we've been fighting for tenants for a long time. And we got a bill passed where tenants have lawyers in housing court. 90% of the landlords had lawyers. 30% of the tenants did not. it was a success. 84% of the tenants got to stay in their homes. Here we go again, fighting to extend the moratorium. The mayor say there is 1 million tenants behind on their rent, and we all know it is behind the pandemic. No one has said how many tenants have lost a loved one during this pandemic. No one has said how many tenants could not go to a funeral. No one is talking about the high food prices. No one is talking about that the kids got to go back to remote learning. These are just some of the small sufferings of tenants, a small fraction. And now, you know, they have added another burden on tenants, eviction. Still, 2 years in the middle of a pandemic that's running wild all over the world, 214,986 pending evictions. 90% is non-payments. Let me be clear. We're talking about mothers, fathers, grandparents, children. We found money to bail out everybody but tenants. We just gave the MTA $6 billion grant, and there is no money for tenants who did not cause this pandemic. We've already have a homeless problem, and now it's going to be a bigger homeless problem. We're asking the government and the Assembly and the Senate and the mayor to extend the moratorium until June 2022 and add more money to ERAP, and asking the state pass the state right to counsel bill so everybody in New York City can have a right to an attorney when this pandemic is over with and we go back to housing court. The Bible say a house that divides against itself cannot stand. And we cannot stand the way we're going today. Tenants are people that have feelings. And what our Deputy Borough have said, the Bronx have been hit with the highest, even when we started to pass the right to counsel, that 11,000 tenants was being evicted. And that's why we did this campaign with you and Vanessa, because of the suffering of tenants being homeless and thrown out for no reason. So I'm asking the governor, the mayor, the assembly, and the Senate to put more money in the ERAP, to extend the moratorium, and to pass the state right to counsel bill that we have in. And let me stop with this note. June the 27th, we're having a town hall, and everybody that's here is being invited. And I want to thank you once again, Mark.
Thank you so much, Randy, for what you and the coalition have done. And the fight continues. We're proud to be partnering with you. I'd like to cue my successor in the 7th Council District, a council member who himself was a tenant lawyer. We have an embarrassment of riches because I also believe that Councilmember Krishnan and Feliz were both tenant lawyers. And of course, Councilmember Stevens, De La Rosa, and Ressler could probably play tenant lawyers on TV because you know so much. So we have a highly qualified incoming class. But Councilmember Abreu, really thrilled to turn it over to you on a topic that you are an expert on and passionate about. So take it away.
Mark, thank you so much for convening this very much needed press conference on the right to counsel. As you know, right to counsel for me has always been very personal. My family was evicted from our apartment when I was 9 years old. And one can only imagine the impact that right to counsel could have had in my family in the 1990s. Perhaps applied for the arrears, rent arrears that we needed to pay off, or navigating the legal process could have kept us in our rent stabilized apartment and kept things affordable for us. But instead we had to take shelter with our neighbors. As a tenant lawyer, I've seen the impact that right to counsel has had on tenants. And Mark Levine, Vanessa Gibson, the work that you have done with right to counsel, I mean, is really, really remarkable. You know the numbers. 84% of our families stay in their homes as a result of having legal representation, right? And building on that foundation, Mark, you can count on me, as well as my looking forward to working on my colleagues to making sure that we pass Right to Counsel 2.0, right? Making sure that families making up to 400% of the federal poverty line are guaranteed legal representation. But as well, right, we've got to continue managing caseloads. As the eviction moratorium, I mean, it has ended now and it has lapsed. We're going to be expecting insurmountable caseloads for so many of our tenant lawyers, and we have to do something about that. But while we're at this press conference, right, is when we talk about right to counsel, we mean the right to counsel. Therefore, a case in housing court should not be proceeding unless you have an attorney. So yes, there should be automatic adjournments, and that discretion should be applied by our judges as a blanket policy, and I agree with our bar president there. So let's make sure that we give teeth to the meeting right to counsel by making sure that everyone can exercise that right. And by going forward without legal representation, we're denying them that right. And so to conclude, I just want to say I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues here, tenant advocates, tenant lawyers, the Right to Counsel Coalition. I know there's going to be a lot that we're going to accomplish together, and we'll do that alongside each other. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Abreu. We're going to hop now to the Bronx, back to the Bronx. Councilmember Stevens, I know that you, like your predecessor, are passionate and that your constituents are hit so hard by this new wave. So we'd like to hear from you, please.
Well, thank you so much, VP Levine, for having us here today. I have a special place in my heart for you because you once represented my parents when you were the council member, and now that's Sean Abreu, and now you're now their borough president. So I always like to say you're in charge of the parents. So, so thank you for having us. Thank you all my colleagues for being here. Hello, Randy, how you doing? I hope all is well. CASA is another group that I have been working very closely with, and I love because they do amazing work in the Bronx around advocating and also educating tenants on their rights. And even how they conduct their meetings are amazing. They make sure language access happens. They make sure that tenants are actually leading these conversations. So I always want to make sure that I give big ups to them because they do amazing work, not only in my district, but throughout the Bronx. So we're always looking to work with them and partner with them. And I've been partnering with them for a while now. So I'm really excited. But we know why we're all here today. The eviction moratorium ended, and it's a travesty. We have to really think about the trauma that this is going to cause on families. I like to coin myself as a youth development person. And I think that it's important for us to think about how this is going to affect young people going to school every day when they are having pending evictions. Sean just shared a very personal story about how he was affected when he was younger. And that also gave him a fight to do this work now. But I want us to think about if we can really avoid traumatizing young people even more than what they are from being in a pandemic for the last 2 years, not being able to socialize, I think it's just as important for us to do that. Right now, the Bronx has the highest number of pending evictions, which means there are going to be thousands of people who are going to be evicted because this moratorium was ending. To be honest, it is our responsibility to provide resources to make sure this does not happen, because we're going to create a population of people being homeless, which is 100% unacceptable. So I'm excited to work with my colleagues. Everyone knows that I'm in this fight. I believe housing is a human right and that everyone should have access to homes free from eviction and threats and being homeless. So I am excited to be here. I'm going to continue to fight, stand with everyone here, and make sure that we get the resources that we need, work with our state electeds to help them get this moratorium back until we have a full concrete plan on how we're going to move forward. ERAP, yes, we know we have a whole bunch of applications, but the money's not there yet. So what's really going to happen? At this point, we have people who are signing up for a program with empty dreams, and that is just unacceptable. So it's our responsibilities as electeds to make sure that people are not being evicted and they stay in their home. So I know I have big shoes to fill because Vanessa Gibson, everyone knows, is amazing, and she's doing amazing work and been on the ground with all the things going on in the Bronx. But everyone knows that the same work that she did, I'm going to do it ×2 because that has been my assignment. So I'm excited to get to work and making sure people stay in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stevens. And we are in a little bit going to hear from another advocate. I understand there's some challenges in getting Fidela Albert onto the to get promoted here as a panelist. So we're working on that. Promise we won't forget you. In the meantime, we're going to bounce back to the borough of Brooklyn. I won't say where it ranks among the 5, but I am thrilled that we are joined with another new member of the city council, someone who is deeply knowledgeable and passionate about tenants' rights issues, Councilmember Lincoln Ressler.
Well, thank you, Borough President Levine. I have to say that, Mark, your and Vanessa's extraordinary leadership on Right to Counsel is one of the most consequential victories that we've had in New York City in the last decade. And you deserve enormous credit for helping to lead that coalition. And there were many great advocates in that fight, but the first among equals was CASA. And I especially just want to shout out Susanna and all of the organizers and leaders and tenants involved at CASA who did a phenomenal job pushing the administration. I was there, I was on the receiving end, and was honored to be able to play a small role in helping to move things along on our side. It's great to be with so many good colleagues in government. My brother, Antonio Reynoso, I will show up to any press conference he's at because he's always on the right side. And as he pointed out, Shaker has been leading the fight for us, for our tenants in North Brooklyn for many years. So it's great to be with you always, especially on this issue. You know, just yesterday, we organized volunteers across the 33rd Council District to come out and go door to door to specifically reach out to tenants who have eviction proceedings against them and connect them to resources. We meticulously went through the court records and documents so that we could find tenants at their doorstep and make sure that they have the resources they need to access an attorney, to access support, rental assistance, to stay in their homes. We're going to do everything we can to stop evictions in our community. The moratorium never should have been lifted in the middle of this pandemic, but we are where we are. And of course, we're going to work with our allies, Carmen's former colleagues up in Albany, to get good cause eviction done. And we're going to work at the local level to make sure that every individual who needs a lawyer in New York City has right to counsel, no matter their income. But in the immediate, we do not have the attorneys and the capacity to meet the wave, the tsunami of evictions that is happening in New York City as we speak. And so we're calling on OCA to step up and recognize that right to counsel needs to be recognized. And if tenants who deserve a lawyer, who are owed a lawyer, don't have one, then we need to slow down the process and we need to rethink where we are. So OCA has a lot of power in this process right now, and they need to be better allies in recognizing the rights of tenants so that we can keep as many people in their home. Evictions are violent. And I'll just say this, you know, despite the pandemic, right? We have 5,000 fewer families in our shelter system today than when the moratorium started, when the pandemic began. 5,000 fewer homeless families are in shelter tonight as a result of this eviction moratorium. We need to do everything we can to connect families who are at risk of eviction to the support and resources they need so that we don't see those numbers of homeless families skyrocket back up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and powerfully stated. The stakes could not be higher. Thank you for being here. That's a great segue to a man who now represents the borough of Queens, despite his track record in the borough of Brooklyn. Councilmember Krishnan, we're really grateful for what you've done for years on behalf of tenants, and the fact that your knowledge is now being put to work on behalf of policy in the council is great news. So welcome, and please take it away.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shaker Krishnan from Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, Queens, the Queens representation in this group of electeds here today. But I want to say, first of all, a big thank you to my colleagues for so long in this fight from the Right to Counsel Coalition, all of you. It has been such an honor to fight by your side for so long and to continue to do so in this capacity as well. Thank you for your leadership as a coalition in implementing Right to Counsel, historic milestone in our city. Randy, great job as always, so powerfully said with your words. Good to see you too. Thank you so much to Borough President Mark Levine and Vanessa Gibson, who were the leaders in this fight with us in government as we got this done. Borough President Antonio Reynoso as well, who was there by our side too, fighting every step of the way in neighborhoods that are facing some of the highest rates of displacement and gentrification in this entire city. I'm so excited to see all my colleagues as well in this fight with us, because at this point, after this past weekend, we are facing over 200,000 eviction cases that will move forward in this city. And we have seen firsthand the difference between having counsel by your side and not having right to counsel. That is the difference between protecting your home and your family and being displaced and evicted. And we also know, and that's something that's most important in this too, that we cannot be talking about rights on a piece of paper. We have to be talking about what they mean in reality on the ground. Because if they don't have meaning in reality, they're worth nothing more than the piece of paper they're printed on. And so if we're talking about a right to counsel in the middle of a public health crisis, and evictions are as much an issue of a housing crisis as they are a public health crisis. But if we're talking about that in this moment, when we're already facing such terrible rates of displacement and evictions in the city and harassment by landlords, then we need to ensure that the right to counsel means something in reality. We need to make sure that every single tenant has access to a lawyer in proceedings. And so right now, when we face such a large wave of eviction cases with tenants who are already struggling to pay rent, who are already struggling against landlords who are harassing them to force them out of their homes, who are already struggling to protect their rights as defined on a piece of paper, it is more critical than ever that the courts postpone the cases, adjourn the court dates to make sure that every tenant has access to their right that is guaranteed on a piece of paper. That is critical, and that must happen right away. And the courts, not just government, but the courts bear responsibility in making sure this happens. And that is our first demand right now. The second one is to make sure that we have urgently full implementation of right to counsel or right to counsel 2.0 in this city as well. And that's a fight that I know all of my colleagues here today and all of us are committed to shouldering and to continuing, because that is the only way to make sure truly that every tenant has access to a lawyer and that we are protecting housing rights, not just on a piece of paper, but in reality. Brevemente en español, mi nombre es Shekhar Krishna de Jackson Heights y Elmhurst, Queens. Un gran agradecimiento a Right to Counsel Coalition por su liderazgo desde hace años en esta lucha. A los presidentes del condado, Mark Levine, Vanessa Gibson, Antonio Reynoso, por sus esfuerzos en esta lucha también. Bueno, estamos aquí para mandarle un mensaje clarísimo a las cortes. Es que ya estamos enfrentando una crisis de vivienda en esta ciudad, pero ahora esta crisis es aún peor. Porque después de este fin de semana vamos a estar enfrentando olas y olas de casos de evicción en esta ciudad. Y ya vimos nosotros, sabemos nosotros la diferencia entre los casos donde los inquilinos tienen acceso a abogados y los casos que no. Es la diferencia entre proteger su propia casa y desplazamiento. Así que es urgente que la corte posponga estas fechas en la corte hasta que cada inquilino en esta ciudad tenga su propio derecho a abogados, y también que tenemos plena implementación de Right to Counsel 2.0 o la segunda versión de Right to Counsel en esta ciudad. Y acuérdese a todos los inquilinos que están escuchando a esta rueda de prensa ahora, ustedes tienen el pleno derecho de quedarse en su casa. Nadie puede botarlo de su casa, puede cambiar la cerradura. Hay reglas, hay un procedimiento en las cortes, hay leyes, y todos los dueños de esta ciudad tienen que cumplirse con estas leyes. Muchísimas gracias y seguimos adelante.
Señores, yo pensé que yo hablaba bien el español, pero ya, no, me tumbaron del puesto número 1. Le felicito al concejal Krishnan. Wow, this is a multilingual bunch here. If anyone would like to proceed by offering their remarks in Yiddish, I will allow you the floor right now. Lincoln, could you pull it off? Probably not quite.
No, I couldn't. I'm sorry.
But I am thrilled that I think we have solved our technical problems, and that we have our friends and allies, leaders from the Flatbush Tenants Coalition, that have made it onto the stage here. And so we're going to cue our next speaker, Fidel Albert. Are you on? Because we can't see based on the names. It looks like You need to unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, sorry. My name is Sabrina Simon. I am going to be reading for Fidel since we're having some connection issues.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina.
So good afternoon. Oh, there she is. I think I hear her. All right, awesome.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fidel Albert. I'm a tenant leader with the Flatbush Tenant Coalition and many other organizations. I am looking to abolish all evictions forever, be it winter or else. Before we proceed, let's take a moment of silence for the victim of this horrific fire in the Bronx, caused by landlords' failure to provide adequate heat and to do proper repairs. Let's bow our heads for the victims. Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Our elected officials in Albany went to their warm and safe homes this weekend while they ignore millions of tenants. Please extend the eviction moratorium. We need to have the eviction moratorium renewed until June 2022. Put more money and extend the ERAP. Pass the state right to counsel and stop cases and stop evicting people. We are in the blunt of severe winter. We are still going through the COVID pandemic, which is on the rise tremendously. Macy's, Bed Bath & Beyond, also CVS Pharmacy are closing around us. Business and stores are closing. That means many people will be out of work. There's already tons and tons of homeless people on the street. We don't need any more of us to be homeless. So I'm asking Governor Hochul, Mayor Eric Adams, and other elected officials to renew the moratorium until June 2022, sorry. Pass a permanent winter ban and statewide right to counsel. Governor Hochul and elected officials, you are not wearing the tight shoes. You don't know how it feels to wear our shoes because you have a warm home to go to and a warm bed to sleep in. If the eviction moratorium is not extended, many people and their families would not be like you all. You are responsible for evicting people and making them homeless. It's like an old saying, you give a dog water to quench his thirst, but instead you're killing him in other ways, saying you're helping him. What I mean, evicting us at this time when the pandemic is on the rise and winter is here. Yes, and winter is here. We will either get COVID or we will freeze to death and die. The fire in the Bronx is a good example of many people that lost their lives because of landlord negligence. Enough is enough. This gotta stop. We can't continue with this. Governor Hochul and other elected officials have a heart. Extend the winter eviction moratorium until June 2022 and pass the permanent winter ban and pass the permanent winter eviction ban and pass the state right to counsel. Thank you so much for having me. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Ms. Albert. Thank you to the Flatbush Tenants Coalition, which has been critical in this fight and continues to be. We're really grateful for you. We're going to come back to the borough of Manhattan, to my neighbor uptown, one of the rising stars of the new class, I'm pleased to welcome Councilmember Carmen de la Rosa.
Thank you, Mark, and I want to thank VP Reynoso and Deputy VP Peguetto for being here. You know, it's not a coincidence that our 3 VPs were part of the leadership of the previous council and were leaders in how to protect and defend tenants. So I want to congratulate you all for not only doing groundbreaking, transformative work that we are now is our blueprint for continuing to protect tenants across the city, but for as VPs taking on this mantle. And to Jeanette, bienvenidas. We are so proud to have you representing us in the Bronx as well. So I feel like right here we have the brain trust of what to do to protect our tenants. And all of my colleagues have spoken so eloquently about what needs to happen on the state, federal, and city level. I just want to reemphasize to our colleagues in Albany, to Governor Hochul, that they do have the power with a swift movement of the pen to extend the eviction moratorium. And I know I've sat in those rooms, and I know that there are homeowners in other parts of the state that feel, you know, conflicted by the eviction moratorium. But the reality is that when you become a homeowner, you have a responsibility to the people that you rent your home out to, that you make profit from every single day, to not throw them out into the streets when things get tough, when it's cold outside, or when a global pandemic hits our communities. Humanity, we have to remember people's humanities and understand that they need a home in order to heal, that they need a home in order to send their children to school, that they need a home in order to continue to be part of our communities. We also need to pass good cause eviction. I signed on to the bill early in Albany, and we continue to call for good cause eviction because it's just what it says, good cause. If we believe that housing is a human right, then everyone should have access to housing, and we should not be evicting tenants in the middle of a global pandemic. For our federal colleagues, we need action when it comes to making sure that New York gets its fair share of the funding to staff off some of these evictions. In communities like mine, Washington Heights, Inwood, Marble Hill, and Upper Manhattan, we have been the epicenter of evictions before the pandemic hit. We have the highest number of rent-stabilized tenants in the state of New York, and therefore we are also in the crosshairs of what is the injustices that happen in the housing system, from undignified housing to the discrimination that tenants face when they have to go to court and don't have adequate representation. So as a city elected, we are calling for the expansion and the swift implementation of the Right to Counsel 2.0 as well. And we want our courts to do right by these tenants, to make sure that courts are places where tenants can go and have their rights protected and not the other way around. So I join my colleagues in making these demands, and we look forward to continuing to work to usher in the changes that we need in the city council. Y rápidamente en español, fui inquilina por mucho tiempo en mi comunidad del Alto Manhattan. Sé personalmente, como muchos de mis colegas aquí, lo que significa ser un inquilino en la ciudad de Nueva York. Nuestros presidentes del condado fueron líderes cuando fueron concejales y ahora son nuestros presidentes del condado para asegurar que los inquilinos tengan acceso a sus derechos como inquilinos en la ciudad de Nueva York. Vamos a seguir trabajando juntos para asegurar que en Albany, en la legislatura estatal, esos derechos sean protegidos, pasando leyes como la buena causa, para asegurar que nuestros inquilinos no puedan ser desalojados en el medio de invierno o en una pandemia, llamando a nuestros líderes federales de que el dinero que el Estado de Nueva York se merece para las protecciones de los inquilinos esté aquí y llegue a nuestras comunidades. Y claro, como concejales y líderes en la ciudad de Nueva York, vamos a estar trabajando juntos para asegurar que el derecho a un abogado se le dé a cada inquilino en la ciudad de Nueva York. Así que gracias. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for that powerful statement. Councilmember de la Rosa, excited to work with you on this and so much more. And now, to close us strong, the Mariano Rivera of this press conference, my friend, another former tenant attorney back to the Bronx, Councilmember Oswald Feliz. Concejal, por favor.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much, Borough President Levine, for having me. I'm Councilmember Oswald Feliz, and I'm so honored and privileged to join you and all of our colleagues in calling not only for the moratorium to be extended, but also to put all eviction cases on hold unless our tenants have a lawyer to help them assert their rights. Today, I join as council member of the Bronx, the 15th district. I also joined as a tenant lawyer. I defended many tenants in housing court. And as a tenant lawyer, I can tell you that tenants facing eviction cases are some of our most vulnerable residents. They are poor, low-income residents. Many of them are not aware of their rights because it's the first time navigating a legal system or process. And many of them don't have tools to defend themselves. At a time when our temperatures are dangerously cold, and at a time when our city is facing so much instability, this is not the time to have any evictions moving forward. Our city should be putting every single eviction case on hold, and we should not allow any case to move forward at all unless these tenants have a lawyer to help them assert their rights. We need a city that works for all of us, a city that works for everyone, including those that have been affected by this pandemic and are suffering from financial instability. We need a system that truly protects our families, a system that protects our vulnerable tenants. We need a system that puts all eviction cases on hold and does not allow any case to move forward unless there's a lawyer right next to our tenants and our families defending them and aggressively litigating their rights. So thank you so much for this very important initiative. Looking very forward to working with you every step of the way to make it happen. And briefly in Espanol, we'll test out how good it is. I know there's some competition going on. Muchísimas gracias, Presidente del Condado de Manhattan, Mark Levine. Un honor y privilegio estar contigo, llamando para un sistema que realmente proteja a nuestros inquilinos y nuestras familias. Personas que están en corte de vivienda son familias vulnerables, personas de bajo ingreso y personas que no tienen recursos para defenderse y defender a su apartamento. Nuestro sistema tiene que ser un sistema que realmente lo proteja, un sistema que no deje que nadie sea desalojado, pero también un sistema que llame, que cada inquilino tenga un abogado defendiéndolo, o si no, el caso no se mueva adelante. Ese sistema es un sistema necesario que va a salvar vidas y también un sistema que realmente protegerá a nuestros inquilinos. Son un honor y privilegio de estar contigo, Mark Levine, presidente de Manhattan, y con todos mis colegas llamando para ese sistema. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Council Member. Truly appreciate your leadership and your remarks here. And that wraps up our speaking program, but I believe we have a question or two from the press who's here. So Wynn, I'm going to cue you for that.
Thank you, Borough President. We do not have any questions yet, but if a member of the press would like to ask anyone on the panel a question, if you could please raise your digital hand, I will allow you to ask your question. Anyone? Great. First up, we have Greg Mcqueen. Greg, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, thanks a lot. Hi, Borough President. How are you doing?
Good to see you, Greg. Always great to have Manhattan Times / Bronx Times here with us.
Thanks a lot. Due to COVID, many housing court hearings will be held virtually at this time, but a number of tenants in underserved neighborhoods, especially seniors, as you know, they don't have access to the internet. So how concerned are you about this, and what should legal aid groups do, in your opinion, to help assist these tenants?
It is so critical that every tenant know they have this right. Landlords will exploit it otherwise. They can intimidate a tenant who would be scared that the landlord could evict them without protection of an attorney. So we have actually passed a law in the city council. I want to get the intro number, or the law is now Local Law 53, which requires that the city fund community-based organizations to do direct outreach to tenants, to knock on doors, to inform tenants they have this right, whether they have an internet connection or not, whether they have a smartphone or not. We need to tell tenants this now, because that changes the power dynamic. And we have partnered with the Right to Counsel Coalition in that fight. And I don't know if you, Randy, on behalf of the Right to Counsel Coalition, want to say anything more about local law 53 and how important it is that it be funded now.
Yes, what we're waiting on right now is for them to release the money so we can send our organizers out there to let the tenants know that they have the right. And due to the fact that George Dressler is no longer there, it's a new person there. And Susanna and the Right to Counsel met with the Chief of Staff today. I wasn't at that meeting because I had to do grandpa duties. And so they will be able to tell you more about that meeting.
But to our friends who are now in the council, we passed this law last year as part of a package that we pushed through in the pandemic. And while the law, I don't believe, contained an exact amount for the funding, we have called for $5 million that would support the kinds of community-based groups that all of us have in our districts that would proactively do the outreach and organizing so tenants know they have this right. So we'll certainly be relying on our advocates in the council to carry on this fight.
Mark, I have something else to add.
Please, Sean, yeah.
So I think it's also very important, right, that from the legal standpoint in housing court, that we're not punishing our tenants for, especially vulnerable tenants, older adults who don't have access to technology, with default judgments. So I think that we need to make a push for there to be automatic adjournments in these cases until we can guarantee that folks have access to technology and actually make an appearance. But I think that you're right. The source of the problem is making sure we're funding local law 53. But on the court side, courts should be exercising discretion to make sure that adjournments, or rather default judgments, are not brought in for failure to appear, especially with the first go around, right? Like we need to at least have a few appearances, give the tenants the chance to appear.
Exactly. I see we have a question from Edwin Martinez from El Diario La Prensa. Adelante, Edwin. When, if you could promote Edwin Martinez so he can ask this question live.
Edwin, are you there?
We see you, Edwin, if you want to unmute.
Yeah. Hi, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you so much for this. So basically, we understand that the biggest or the most urgent step has to come from Albany right now with the moratorium extension. But my question is, what should and what can do right now, like in the next days, Mayor Eric Adams, in order to help these tenants if the state doesn't take the measures that we read right now?
Our first call is to the courts. Every judge has discretion that we want them to use to stop moving forward on any eviction case if the tenant doesn't have an attorney. We want that is the best way to guarantee full implementation of right to counsel. And we're asking the Office of Court Administration to guarantee this. The city has a role in fully funding and staffing and putting the resources in. I don't know, Borough President, and also if you want to answer that question to round it out in any way.
Yeah, look, we want all hands on deck. We're going to be doing everything we can as borough presidents and council members to try to release a valve here and allow for us to protect our tenants. But we cannot abdicate the responsibility of this work away from the state and the federal government. We got to be very clear that the state at this moment can very clearly, and which we've done already, write an executive order to continue the moratorium. That is very straightforward and not complicated. And the city is a creature of the state, and in doing so has limited authority and charter mandated responsibilities that just don't allow us the resources or the wherewithal to really protect our tenants in a way that the state can. So we got to be mindful of the fact that this is more of a call on our federal and state government than it is on our city government. But like Borough President Levine just said, encouraging courts to do as Councilmember Abreu has stated, it is a step in the right direction. But it's something that we're doing by pushing and encouraging discretion as opposed to just having the moratorium extended by the state. So I want to really push back on this idea that, should the governor not do anything, what should be the next steps? All of our pressure and our target should be at the person that can change this literally with the width of a pen.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so much. I just want to also highlight what Susana Blankley, a legend in the Right to Counsel movement, has pointed out in the chat, which is that Local Law 53, we were referring to this to fund the outreach and organizing, was supposed to be implemented in November of last year. To date, the city has not even released the RFP. So we are behind, and we need to rectify that as soon as possible, because we are heading into what could be the worst season of evictions ever in New York City. So thank you, Susana, for giving us that important information. We're about to wrap up, so I do want to cue Deputy Borough President Peguetto, if you'd like to respond on this point or any others before we close out.
I just want to echo and support Susana's comments in the chat that we need to work with our city folks to ensure that these resources are reaching our tenants, and now during a time where we're crunched for time. So if we can all work collectively to, you know, just encourage that these resources are meeting the needs of our tenants.
Thank you so much, Deputy Borough President. Thank you, Borough President Reynoso, and to all my colleagues in the council. This has been a really important discussion that I'm proud we were all part of together. We're going to continue this fight together on behalf of tenants as long as it takes. Thank you so much, everybody.